Okay, so hi everybody, and welcome to our amazing virtual event that I am so excited to be doing with author Megan Bannen. Now, Megan is a librarian and also the author of The Bird and the Blade, as well as her newest novel, Soul Swift. In her spare time, she collects graduate degrees from Kansas colleges and universities. And while most of her professional career has been spent in public libraries, she has sold luggage, written grants, and taught English at home and abroad. Her newest book, the YA fantasy Soul Swift, which you can see right over here, released last November as number 8 on the Kids Indie Next list. And she currently lives in the Kansas City area with her husband, their 2 sons, and a few too many pets with literary names. She can be found online at www.meganbannen.com. So, hi, Megan. It is so nice to have you here.
Hi, Marielle. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited about this. In case anyone watching doesn't know, I am a huge fan of the Soul Swift book, and I am also now a huge fan of the other Megan Bannen book right here, The Bird and the Blade. I was so honored that my blurb for Megan's newest book actually got into the Winter Kids Indie Next list. And it is and if anyone is interested, it is currently sitting on my staff pick shelf in the bookstore, which, is wonderful. And it's beautiful, and it is such a great story, Megan, and it is so well written.
Thank you.
Basically, what I wanted to start off with, and I'm switching up the questions, although not exactly switching them up, but moving one, because I think this would make more sense to start with. Mm-hmm. So just to sort of like describe your book to people. So obviously, as booksellers, we're always trying to find the best way to sell books we love to our customers. So for Soul Swift, I usually sell it as an epic fantasy and romance that will break your heart, but you're going to love it anyway. So how would you sell your book to someone who had never heard of it before?
Right. Well, that's really good. I'm just terrible at selling my own books. Like, as a librarian, I just want to shove other people's books in everyone else's hands. It's like, no, don't read that. Read this other book. I guess when people ask what Soul Swift is about, I always tell them it's the story of a girl who inadvertently becomes a vessel of an immortal being that is either a goddess who will save the world or a demon who will end it. And she has to decide which of those religious beliefs is correct, if either, and what she's going to do about it.
That is so great. And that is such a great way to describe it. Like, I always see, my thing is, I describe it in more general terms because I have such a hard time, like there's so much that happens in it, and I have such a hard time whittling it down to just like that little bit, but that was awesome. So sort of in accordance with that. So your first book, The Bird and the Blade, it was based on an opera that was inspired by a story in 1001 Days. So my question is, what sparked the idea for something like that, or was it something like entirely different?
No, it was everything about writing Soul Swift was different. Everything. And not necessarily in a good way. So like with Bird and the Blade, it was like a light bulb moment. Like, oh, I want to write this story, but from this character's point of view. And I really, done. There's the story. Whereas Soul Swift was this kind of amorphous process. And I don't even remember the moment where I made this decision. But for some reason, I decided that I really wanted to write a book that had the same emotional tone as a piece of music called The Lark Ascending by Rafe Vaughan Williams. And I know it sounds really hefty, but honestly, it's actually a really famous piece of music, and the odds are really good that if you heard part of it, you'd go, oh, I know that. That's familiar. It's really beautiful, and I don't know what you call it, I guess it's a violin piece with orchestra, and the violin is written so that it sounds like a lark singing as it's ascending into the sky. So it actually sounds like a bird. And it's this very bittersweet piece of music where there's this deep sense of longing and yearning and sadness, but there's beauty in that sadness. It's just gorgeous. And I'm like, I want to write a book that makes readers feel the way this piece of music feels. So how am I going to do that? And I would just listen to it over and over again as I was like driving to work, as I'm walking the dog. And at some point in time, I just got this one moment in my head, and I knew instinctively that it's the thing that happens at the end of the book. So I can't tell you what it is, but if you've read the book, you know what happens. And the thing is, what happens at the end of the book is kind of strange. Like, it's not something you see every day. And I just thought, well, that's weird. So what would make that happen? And in what world would that happen? And why would that happen? And I think the beginning of Soul Swift was trying to answer those questions. Like, what story would lead up to that moment as its big climactic ending? And it wasn't until I got the idea for Tavik. And again, he was also inspired by a piece of music because I was still listening to The Lark Ascending, but I was walking the dog, and for some reason, whatever device I was listening to wouldn't let me forward to The Lark Ascending, which is the third track on that particular recording. So I had to listen to the first two tracks, and one of them is Fantasy on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, or Fantasia on a Theme. Shoot, okay, it's whatever. It's also by Ray Fun Williams. And as I was listening to it, I immediately got the idea for Tavik, he's the second main character of the book. And the moment I saw was a moment that's in the book, and it's where he is praying. And I knew immediately that's what he was doing. And that's kind of what I knew. This is a book that is going to be about religion. And that made a lot of sense to me because as a young adult, as a 17-year-old, the thing I struggled with most was a crisis of faith. And what do you do when you start to doubt the thing that everyone you know and love holds as absolute truth? And so from that point forward, I knew that was going to be the emotional heart of that story.
Oh, that is just so cool. Oh.
And cool and messy. That's like I don't recommend developing a story idea that way.
Well, it seems to work excellently for you. The first spark was from an opera. Now we have like this awesome music that sparks it. So it seems to work wonders for you. And actually, it looks like Drew just put in, there is a comment in the live chat from an Allison Berry. She says that she loves both of these books.
Oh,
so is a huge fan.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice.
I know. Oh
nice.
My goodness. But that is just so, that's so awesome. That whole, oh man. But now I want to listen to those songs.
You should. They're beautiful.
Oh, okay. So this kind of leads into a little bit of what else I wanted to talk about here is just, so both of your books, both of these are, they're fantasy but The Bird and the Blade is definitely, I felt much more historically based because it does take place in the 13th century in the Mongol Empire, like the actual place. Whereas, Soul Swift is a decidedly fantasy world. Yeah. Now, you could argue about mirroring certain things in our world, but it is its own place. So did you find the world building for Soul Swift easier than Bird and the Blade? Was it more difficult? Was it the same? Was the techniques you used, were they different? And how they were different, if they were?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say something that no fantasy author ever says, ever. Because there's something, I'm bizarre like this. Look, I hate world building. Out of all the things I have to do in writing a book, world building is my nemesis. It's definitely my weak point as a writer. And so I have to work extra hard at it because it doesn't come naturally to me, which sounds like, okay, Megan, why are you writing fantasy? What is wrong with you? But that's what I do. So as far as which one was easier or harder, given that I already struggle with world building, oh my God, Soul Swift. A book tried to murder me. It was so hard to write for so many reasons. And with Bird and the Blade, it's set in the Mongol Empire. And so it kind of, that created a structure already in place so that if a question came up, well, why would this happen? Or why would a person respond this way? Or what would a person wear or eat or whatever? Those answers existed in reality. So even though there's a magical element in that book, it's borderline historical fiction. Mm-hmm. Whereas Soul Swift is a totally different world. And every time I would solve one problem related to world, it would create another problem related to world. And I'll give you an example. So in the book, there is a part of the world where monsters live. And those monsters are really, really important and are a thread throughout the entire book. Like, we build up to the part where we get to the monsters. It's not till part 4. But you know about them from the beginning. And they weren't even in the first draft of the book. I was revising the book. And I think the first draft, it was a sloppy first draft where I'm like, I don't know, they got to cross through mountains or something. And so as I'm revising the book, here's this problem. I have characters I have a world with a country that has to be very, 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 very hard to get to. It's very important that this one place is hard to get to. And as I'm revising, I'm like, well, people cross mountains. People find a way. People want to have commerce or explore the world or whatever. There has to be something more daunting than mountains to cut off this one little country from the rest of the world. So there's monsters. There's monsters that will eat you if you walk through this part of the world. There we go. Monsters, problem solved. So there's draft 2, and then draft 3, I'm like, okay, Megan, you're like, hey, there's monsters here. Like, what? Why are there monsters there? Who are they? Where do they come from? Why do they eat people? Why are they only there and not somewhere else? And so now it's like this kind of you're constantly fixing one problem, but creating another one. And so every time you kind of add something to a secondary world, you have to give it rules and explain why it exists. And that is horrible. That's just horrible.
And then, this is adding on to that. It is a lot of fantasy writers that I've heard speak. They do say yeah, you can create whatever you want, but then you have to create rules for it. And then everything else in the world has to also then follow the rules. You can't all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm going to make up this new rule halfway through. And there you go. It's a thing now. It's no. It's once the rules are set, then you have to keep to those rules that make sense in that world. And I could definitely see how that would be difficult.
Yeah. It's especially let me just create religions from scratch. Fine. No problem. That's easy. No one ever.
Oh my gosh, I know. And then just another add-on that just occurred to me, because when you're talking about the country that they have to get to that's far away, in both of your books, which is really cool, they have in the beginning really detailed maps in the beginning. Did you draw those maps?
Oh God, no.
Have anything to do? I mean, I'm assuming you.
Yeah, I have feedback on this. So with the Bird and the Blade, it's the Mongol Empire. It's not like Asia disappeared. It's still there,
Yeah.
and many of the place names are actually even still the same. So it was more with that one. It was more me kind of going back and forth with the artist, just double checking the accuracy of the map. Right. With Soul Swift, I actually did draw the first, hand draw the first map that existed. And I don't know, I found some program online that randomly generates land masses. And I just kept looking and looking until I found one that seemed to kind of fit the shape of the world I wanted. And printed it out and kind of started traced it, started divvying up where these countries are and things like that. And then, so that map eventually went to the artist, Maxime Place. And he worked his magic and made this beautiful, awesome map at the beginning of the book. But what's really funny though, is if you look at the actual just outline and shape and where the countries are, it's very similar, just a lot prettier than the slop I gave him.
That is so cool. I did not know there was a computer program that could just generate land masses.
Who knew? But desperate times call for desperate measures. Right? I'm not an artist.
Oh my gosh. Do you remember what it was called? Now I'm just interested in that because I'm a nerd.
I don't know. I probably have it in my bookmarks in Safari, but
no worries. I'm sure I can, you can Google it or something. I just was wondering because I'm a nerd when it comes to maps, so I was super excited to see the pretty maps in your book. And
I think it's meant for people who do D&D and other role-playing games,
which is that's so awesome that stuff exists. So excited about that. So the next thing I really want to talk about is kind of like something you touched on when you're talking about the world, like creating a religion from, nothing. And obviously, and I did see in Soul Swift, at least I felt that at least, okay, I'm probably going to butcher her name. For some reason in my head, the main character's name is Gala, but I feel like it could be Gelia or something.
Yeah,
Gelia. Okay. So, yes. So, like, in the first thing, we see we see Galia's whole thing as like the issues of like hierarchy and patriarchal stuff in the religion that she is in. It's very front and center, and I did put just for an example. So in the beginning, we have Gelia, and she's viewed as super important because she's this vessel for the word of the Father. But she's only important when she's speaking the word of the Father. Otherwise, it's a very women should be seen and not heard kind of attitude. I think there's even like a line in the beginning where she starts to say something, and then one of the men tells her, you should tell her that, her word should be saved for the Father's words, blah, 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 blah. And then it's the warring religions between like the mother goddess versus those who follow the Father. They view the mother goddess as a demon. Which one is right? In my opinion, anyway, that kind of stuff mirrors a lot of issues that are still faced today in a lot of religions. So was that one, I'm assuming that was your intent to kind of put a light on that, or?
Yes-ish. So I think that the main intent of the book is, like I said, it's a young adult novel. And I think sometimes people forget that, if you're writing a young adult novel, you really are writing for teens. I think some people are like, well, this book is for teens. It's like, well, yes, it is. It wasn't meant for 40-year-olds. I'm sorry. But for me, because it's a book I wrote for my 17-year-old self, for a kid who was surrounded by people who all kind of believed one thing. And these aren't like people jamming it down your throat necessarily. These are people you know and love. It's just that when you believe or start to doubt something that everybody else around you holds as absolute truth, I think that can be very lonely and isolating, especially since faith is considered a virtue. And that even questioning faith is frequently viewed as immoral and bad. And I guess I'm of the opinion that that's not true. I think questioning faith is important. And I think the most important intent behind the book is that I really wanted to put a book in the hands of kids that I wish that I had when I was 17 years old. For anyone who's kind of going through a similar struggle and feeling really alone with it, just to let them understand that they're not alone, that there's other people going through this and it's normal and it's okay and you're gonna be okay. Yeah. And I think just that feeling, I really wanted to give that opportunity to readers to feel understood in a way that maybe they don't feel understood right now with some of the people that they know and love in their lives. But as far as is some of that stuff built in there, yes. And I think what's interesting is The Bird and the Blade also has a lot of religion in it. And The Bird and the Blade is a really religion positive book. And I think religion is one way that you can see that Prince Halaf in The Bird and the Blade is a really good human being because he really lives his faith. Like he's a very moral person and lives his faith well. And I think it's one of the things that contributes to him being a wonderful human being. Whereas in Soul Swift, it's kind of the other side of that coin, which is when you follow faith blindly without questioning any aspects of it, does that lead you down a slippery slope? And I think also there are things that religion can codify in society and systemize in society that become so natural to us that we don't even see it, if that makes sense. So, I think you have to be careful if there's a religion that believes that there is one God and that God is inherently male. I think you have to be careful in making sure that all people are still viewed as equal, regardless of gender identity.
Yes. But yes. So you kind of answered a lot of the other ones, but I will say you highlight all of that, but I felt that there was a great sensitivity in the characters, like even the ones that are following it blindly. Like, and then, oh my gosh, his name escapes me now. Why is it escaping me? Gellia's
Ansgar?
Like, yeah, but Gellia's like the father figure.
Right, good son Ansgar.
Yes, good son. Why could I not? Anyway, like even he seems, even though like there are times he does like these horrible things, and then it just gets worse as you go on. But yet there's something like inherent, the way that you've done it, it sort of it still makes him a sympathetic character to the reader. Because I still felt kind of bad for him, because I kind of got where he was coming from with like, he couldn't admit that maybe he was wrong, because if he admits that, then he spent, a large portion of his life basically doing horrendous things for something that wasn't true.
I mean, yes, I think that's really important for your antagonist in general. Like, I'm not interested in a mustache twirling antagonist. Any antagonist, you should be able to write a book from their point of view and make them the hero. Everyone's the hero of their own story. No one's walking around going, I have an evil plan. I want power. Well, okay, I don't know. There might be people going, I want power. I'm not going to comment on that. But I think often people make horrible mistakes for for what they view as the right reason. I think people often think that they're acting in a way that is moral and good when somebody else can see very clearly that they're not. And I think that's more complicated. And one of the reasons why there's a scene with Gellia and the good son before the story really takes off, because I think it's really important that we establish that relationship, that these two people are like father and daughter. Like, he genuinely loves her like a daughter and really cares about her. And the things that he feels that he has to do in this book are breaking his heart. He doesn't want to do what he is doing, but he feels like he is morally obligated to do it. And I think that's what makes him like an interesting villain.
Yeah.
And the same is true of Tavik. And, at one point, one of my favorite speeches in the book is towards the end where Gellia tells Tavik, you're just like the good son. And he gets so mad at her because that's the ultimate insult for him. But, I mean, at the same time, he follows his faith with just as much earnestness. Like, he is as faithful to his own beliefs as the good son is to his. And, she's like, one of you is wrong. Maybe both of you are wrong. It's not, there's not everything is, this or that, good or evil, life or death. Like, there are things that don't fit into these little boxes you've created.
Which I thought was so interesting, because it's a very gray area, and kind of Gellia gets put in that gray area, like, from almost immediately, because she's been raised in the, I look at it as sort of, it's like a convent, basically, of the father. But then when Tavik comes in and releases the mother goddess, it gets put into her. So now she is carrying this thing that, she's been told all her life is a demon. But yet because she was raised in there. So she's like basically put square in the gray area between these two. And I did love that scene when she tells Tavik, like, yeah, you're basically exactly like the good son. Because I was thinking that the whole time. I'm like, well, you're kind of the same way. I mean, you're willing basically, in a way, like, you don't know what's going to happen to this girl who is now harboring a goddess within her, like this immortal being, but you're perfectly okay with that. And you're just going to go because you are doing the same thing that he is doing. For different I thought that was really well done. I really did enjoy that. I love when the antagonist is not just some horrible, evil person and there's no sympathy for him whatsoever, which you did so well, Megan.
Well, thanks. I mean, because he really does horrible things. Like, you can't let him off the hook.
No, I can't let him off the hook, because he really does. He does really horrible things, and then it gets worse.
And I think that's, at the end, that's where the difference between the good son and Tavik is their actions by the end of the book. Because
exactly.
Tavik is finally, it takes him a while, because Tavik also has his own crisis of faith, right? Like, Gellia starts before the book starts. I mean, Gelia is already kind of going, I don't know about some things before anything happens.
Yes.
So we see her already kind of going, I don't know. And then she ends up becoming the vessel of this thing, and she doesn't know what to believe anymore. Whereas Tavik is very certain, but the more he's with Gelia, and the more Gelia starts poking holes, he's glad to poke holes in her belief, but the more she pokes holes in his, the more he's got to face some things and have his own crisis of faith. And I think that's the difference between Tavik and the Good Son, is by the end, Tavik is willing to make choices based on what's right for Gelia rather than based on what's right according to what he's been taught all of his life.
Exactly, which was also well done. But, and then just another thing I just wanted to touch on, and now I'm kind of like thinking in my head, if the spark for the story was like the songs, did that have anything to do with like you use like songs in the different, like they call them songs in like different religions, and like when she's like in the power of the goddess, she like sings the mother goddess's song. Was that because of it being inspired by music, or was that just something you really wanted to do?
I have no idea. I don't even know like where that idea came from or why I did it. I don't even know. I have no clue.
It was well, then it was an excellent serendipitous effect, because it's this beautiful idea that they're all like these songs, and you know, instead of just straight up like, oh, we're gonna just pray and say words, we're gonna use these songs, and it explains like, you know, the world as each religion sees it. And it's just, and I love how it ties in with like the romance in it, with like how, oh, it's so beautiful. That was a little fangirl moment, everybody. That was me saying, oh gosh, it's so wonderful and beautiful.
Yeah, you're killing me.
It is. Okay, so onward we go. We go into, let's see. So when you were talking about Gelia, how she kind of is already questioning like her belief system, and then she's really forced to like question her belief system, and you know, maybe poke holes in everybody else's systems. And I also liked in The Bird and the Blade how it takes the slave girl from the opera and it makes her the main character. And I felt, so both books, like, so they both books that you put like the woman and you give her a lot more agency to tell their own stories. So I'm assuming that was like an intentional thing. Obviously with Bird and the Blade, I know you really wanted to tell the story of the slave girl, which is great. Was that like something, I'm assuming it's something you planned in Soul Swift as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, especially since, you know, I've been a librarian for a long time and have read a lot of book reviews and things like that. And, you know, I think at some point, like 10, 15 years ago, I found that I was reading a lot of reviews about books with strong female characters and kick-ass girls. And I found myself getting a little bit frustrated with that because those girls were like fighting with swords or have like super awesome fighting powers, or like they're pirates or they're thieves or they're assassins and they're going out in the world and like conquering. Which, listen, don't get me wrong, I love me some great girl pirates. You know what I'm saying? Like I do really enjoy those books. I like a good assassin. Give me a thief anytime. That is great. And I'm glad to see girls in those roles. But I think one thing that I found missing on the flip side was that we kind of stopped seeing girls in kind of more stereotypical ways, or things that we typically code as female, with this idea that the things that we code as female are weak and the things that we code as male are strong. And I found that frustrating because I think, especially at a time in my life when my kids were little and I was like just working so hard and sacrificing so much to kind of keep everybody up and running and healthy and growing. And, you know, I kind of, as a mom, you give everything you have for everybody else. And there's not exactly someone on the back end looking out for you in the same way. There's a lot of sacrifice involved. And to me, that requires an enormous amount of strength of character that we take for granted and don't appreciate. And so I think I'm really interested sometimes as I'm writing my female characters and writing girls who don't necessarily like fight with swords, but exhibit characteristics that we typically code as female, and showing the ways that those things are actually coming from a place of strength, that those are good things that require an inner strength of character. Because Gelia is the only person in that book, for most of that book, who's strong enough to face her doubt and ask questions and try to figure out for herself what she believes about the world. And I think that's hard to do, and that's scary to do. But she's the one who does it most willingly. And I wanted to show that as something that's strong.
Yes. That is, and actually I hadn't even thought of that, but then when I was thinking back while you were speaking, it is true. Like, both of the characters in both of these books, they are they're in roles that were like the stereotypical like women's roles. They're pushed aside, but and they don't pick up swords, they don't pick up stuff to like fight or have superpowers or whatever. They just have this amazing inner strength, and it's like, and to go forth and show that what everybody thinks is their weakness is actually their strength, which was just awesome. So I think that's what I was trying to get at with my question, because I think I knew it in my head, nagging at me, but that was awesome. That is so great. See, and I like it because it's a different kind of girl power story. Like, don't get me wrong, they're both really girl power stories, but in a different way than the kick-ass fighting, pirates.
Which is fun. Don't get me wrong. I love those.
I love those too. But these ones are just, it is so beautiful and wonderful to see that, because it's a little different, which is nice. So going more into the characters. So I'm going to skip on the question, like train them around a little bit. I kind of want to talk about how you were able to write this, like just heavily emotional, heartbreaking story of Gelia and Tavik, because it's so raw and it's just so fraught from the very beginning. And I am still in pain, Megan. Right. But it is the best kind of pain, though. It's like, oh, so wonderful. And I just wanted to know how you were able to like delve into that, and like did it like, I mean, I'm assuming it took a lot out of you to write this.
I don't know. I've been asked this question before, so you'd think I'd have a better answer. I think I come from a theater background, and so I tend to approach stories in a theatrical kind of way. Like, the first thing I do when I'm writing a new scene is I write the dialogue, and only the dialogue. So, because a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, sometimes you'll be reading a book and like someone will say something and there's like a little bit of narration and then someone else responds. Yeah. But if you actually took out the narration and looked at those two lines together, it's like, that's not the normal flow of a conversation. So I always want to avoid that. But I think but my books are really dialogue driven, which means they're also really character driven. Yes. And I think I'm really interested in exploring like these really huge giant topics, but on a really kind of miniature scale. Like, we're not talking about what's wrong with religion. We're talking about what is this character's experience with doubt, and how does it feel for this one character? So it's like a little miniature portrait in detail, I guess. I don't know if that's part of it. I also have a theory that people talk a lot about how my books make them sob, but I think one thing I'm really proud of for both books is I think they're both hilarious. Like, I think they're both hysterically funny. Maybe I'm easily entertained. I don't know, but like, some of my favorite parts to write are the parts where, come on, like, you can't maintain this high stakes drama for this long. Somebody crack a joke, And I think those are some of my favorite moments. And I think the fact that both characters, and the characters in both of my books, they have these moments of just kind of releasing things through humor. And I think that in a way makes them a little more human, and helps readers connect to them a little bit more than just the constant, unending drama, you know?
It is true, yeah, because that does make sense, absolutely. Because yes, you feel so connected to them, and so just like, oh, just all of it is just this huge welling of emotion, and it was just like just so beautifully done, and I was so like amazed how well you're able to get those emotions in there. Oh my gosh, I felt you feel it so hard, yeah, and you know. So that I actually, my thoughts on that actually lead into that. Now, we're not doing spoilers here for Soul Swift, but I think it's pretty obvious from the way that we're talking that there is a tragic ending coming, actually, for both of Megan's books. These are like tearjerkers, guys. And we were talking about this a little bit more, because I actually feel that, yes, they're tragic. You can't say they're not, but each one of them has this like somewhat hopeful feel too. So like, how do you write like that? Why do you think that a tragic ending could also be hopeful?
I think tragedies are hopeful. I think they get a bad rap. And I think part of it is, I blame postmodernism, okay? I blame postmodernism for like writing these stories that are bleak and grim, and they're like, life is horrible, that's the end. Okay, that's not tragedy. That's something else. Tragedy, the point of tragedy for thousands of years, whether it's the ancient Greeks, whether it's Shakespeare, I'm not comparing myself to the ancient Greeks or Shakespeare, but the point of tragedy is to kind of have that moment of catharsis, the moment of emotional release, right? Because in real life, horrible things happen. And I think what tragedy does, what the story of a tragedy does, is it takes the horrible things that can happen to us as human beings, and it gives meaning to that suffering. The whole point of tragedy is to tell us it was worth the living, right? It's what you suffered wasn't for nothing, right? Mm-hmm. Because especially like the year we've had. Oh. I know it sounds crazy to think that after 2020 that tragedy can lift you up, but I think that's the point is, in the real world, it's hard sometimes to have faith or to see that suffering has meaning. And I think that's the one gift that tragedy gives us, is this idea that what we experience as human beings isn't for nothing, you know?
That's so great. So I do have to ask, do you cry at the end of your books? Like at the end of writing them? Are you?
Oh God. So here's where you find out what a horrible human being Megan Bannen is. The truth is, writing the ends of both books was like that's one of my favorite parts, right? That moment of catharsis, the moment of release, the moment where everything happens, right? And I want the reader to be crushed, and I want them to feel. I want readers to feel, you know?
You do.
And I do. And so when I feel like I've got it and I've hit it, you know, it's like, yes, I'm like on the other side, almost cackling with joy. Like, yes, that did it. That's right. So I'm kind of sick and wrong that way. I enjoy that. And as a matter of fact, those scenes are like the carrot I dangle to get through the horrible middle. We are just slogging through and trying to figure out what the order of events are and what needs to happen in order to get to that end, that carrot I'm dangling for the really fun, tragic scene I get to write. So the answer is no.
I actually can totally see that. Like, I can totally see how as a writer, it would actually be enjoyable, because you're like, finally I get to this amazing thing, and it just feels so good to get there. And I gotta tell you, Megan, yeah, it definitely makes you feel, drowning in the feelings and I still feel it, guys. I read this months ago. I am still feeling it. And I will say, Megan, after I read it and I went into work the next day, I basically told everybody there, I am transformed. I will never be the same Marielle that I was before reading it. Like, you would It's just wonderful, guys. So you definitely need to read it. Oh my goodness. And then, and that kind of goes with the thing we were talking about earlier about the fact that both of these are standalones. Where, before we've seen a lot of YA where it's, at least a duology or something, but they are so perfectly brilliant as just standalones. And you were saying about standalones and why you like them. Would you mind sharing that with us again?
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of like being one and done and not dragging it out for myself as well as for the reader, I think one of the of writing a standalone is you can create the world, but you can always come back to it if you want to, and if publishing wants you to. And it also, by the way, gives you a little more time from a publishing perspective if you're writing a standalone. If I was writing a series, I really would have needed to have published the second book by fall of 2019, because Bird and the Blade came out in the summer of 2018. And really, in YA, those series books really need to come one on top of the other, especially since if you're writing for a teen audience, like, they're not going to be teens forever, And there's a lot of pressure to really move those. And so for me, I like kind of the completeness of just that one story. But there's nothing to say I couldn't go back into the world of Soul Swift that I've already created with the rules that already exist for that world, and write something completely different. There's all sorts of stories that could happen in that world if I wanted to, and if publishing wanted me to. Bird and the Blade is a little different. Especially since it's historical, that book ends in a way that's pretty much open and closed. You start the book, there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you are done. That book is done. That story is done. And I do sometimes get emails from people going is there going to be a sequel? And I'm you have a lot of hope in your heart, because I don't know what comes after that. I really don't. Whereas Soul Swift, you can imagine, I think that's part of the hope of that book, is that there is a world that's going to continue and go on after that story. And there's a whole world and history that existed before it, But at the same time, it's its own thing. When I conceived of what that story was, it's a big chonker of a book, but it's really a pretty clear-cut beginning, middle, and end. There was no reason to stretch it out.
Which is great. And I really like it, because you sometimes, honestly, you get a little tired of going back to the same story, and it's it keeps going. Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with series books.
Nothing wrong with that.
Books. And I do like the point that, there could be another story in the same universe, which, is a possibility. Which we were talking earlier about. One of the examples of that I found was Kristen Kaur's Graceling series, where I told you that I read the second book before I realized it was the second book.
Right.
I totally enjoyed it. I did not need to read the first one to enjoy the second one. So, stuff like that is also kind of, I have seen, a trend in the publishing now. They're moving away from trilogies. They're getting into duologies and more your standalones and all that stuff for the YA audience. I think that's great.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And it's, so, yes, and it is very beginning, middle, and end, which is also very nice, because then you're like, oh, great, I got a full story. I don't have to wait now for a year for the other part of that story to come out. So, that is just awesome. So then another question I did want to ask is, and something we sort of were talking about before, but so how do you think your experience as a librarian helped in your writing? Do you think it helped? Did it, how did it do that?
Yeah, it helps a ton. I mean, I was a public librarian for years and years, and I was a youth services librarian. So I served everybody from age 0 to 18 and everything in between. So I was always talking to kids and teens about what they wanted to read, what they liked to read, what they hated to read. because my job isn't to give somebody a book that I like. My job is to give them a book that I think they'll like, as you know, as a bookseller. That's fun. And that's like it's constant feedback about what my target audience wants to read and what they love to read and what they don't like so much in a book. I mean, what's not valuable about that? And I think it also helped in just odd ways. It was being a librarian that got me, when I first wrote The Bird and the Blade, I had no intention of publishing it. I just wanted to write a book for the accomplishment of it and just to say I'd done it. And I was writing the best book that I could write for myself. But I remember very vividly standing in the young adult section at the library where I was working. And then suddenly it occurred to me as I'm looking at all these books, and I've read a ton of them, and just thinking, I feel like what I've written is about as good as like half the books on this shelf. I mean, why not try to publish it? What's the worst someone could say? No. I still wrote a book. I'm going to try. And I don't know that I would have had that moment if I weren't standing, in the young adult section of a library. So, and then as a librarian, as far as just the business of writing, when I went out to try to sell my book, it was clear that I was familiar with the market and I knew what kind of books to compare it to because I'm familiar with what's out there. So those are all things that have helped me, both as a writer and just in my career in the business end of writing.
Which I think is really important because a lot of writers, they think, they'll write a book and then that's it. It's like, and they don't, a lot of either MFA programs or other kind of programs that teach about writing don't really teach a lot about the business part of it. Like, you do have to know the market. You have to be able to, talk more than just, I wrote this book. You need to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think, yes. And like, as a librarian, you can see the market, you actually see it. So that, yes. See, guys, be a librarian, be a bookseller, learn.
It's such a great job. And like right now I am working full time as a writer, but I miss working at the library. And when my kids are a certain age, at some point I know I'm going to go back.
Oh, that's so great. But yes, I did like the thing with the target audience. That is like, you're like, yeah, basically I'm dealing with my target audience every day. So of course I know what they
I can say, and even if I'm not even like chatting with them one-on-one on a daily basis, I see what they're checking out. I see what's flying off the shelf. I know what has a hold list. Yeah.
It's like, that must be really interesting. I know. And it's so, that is such a good experience to have, I think. And the same thing actually does apply, I feel like, as a bookseller, because you do see what flies off the shelves and then what is hard to get back. Like, it's like, some of the books that we get into the store, it's like they come in, they almost immediately leave. And I'm like, well, you weren't the few people that got in before, so we're just going to have to order more. Oh, my goodness. But, yeah. So, with that in mind, so just, were you still working at the library when you were writing Soul Swift as well?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I left the library like a few months after The Bird and the Blade came out. So like, for the first few drafts of Soul Swift, yeah, I was still working at the library.
Nice. So my question is, so for that, so most people say the second book is the hardest one to write. Did you find that? It sounded like it was a lot more difficult for you in like the world building part. Was any of it like easier than Bird and the Blade, or was it all just completely different and it was like you'd never even written a book before and now you have to start all over?
So this is probably a more involved answer than it needs to be. So one thing that I know that like people just looking at my books on the shelf would not know was that so like this book, Bird and the Blade, took me 6 years to write before I got it published. 6 years. And so sometimes I would just get frustrated and set it aside and write something else. And then I'd come back to it and then I'd get sick of it and I'd set it aside and write something else and just back and forth. And then this book sold in a 2-book deal, which meant I needed to write this book. But what most people don't realize is that between writing this book and writing this book, there were 3 other books I wrote. And none of them fit what I would need to write as a second book for this one, right? So like, this is a tragic teen fantasy. So the books that came between Bird and the Blade and Soul Swift were kind of like an adult book club fiction kind of thing that really was not the sort of thing that could be turned into young adult, and also was contemporary realistic. There was a fart joke filled middle grade novel that was completely absurd. Also, not really what my publisher's going to want as a follow-up for Bird and the Blade. And then there was a really, pardon my language, half-assed Regency romance. But it was more like it was meant for the teen audience, but it was not the right follow-up for the Bird and the Blade. So I knew I needed to write another book. So, but I had these 3 other books. So, but they were all like first drafts, should not see the light of day kind of book. So I had to write another book. And I already had the idea for Soul Swift. I knew that was the next book I wanted to write. And I already had a sense that was going to be a good follow-up for the Bird and the Blade. And it turns out my publisher agreed with me, and they're like, yes, write that. And it all worked out. So what I know is that Soul Swift is not like my second book.
Right.
And yet, it is the first book I wrote under contract, which is a very different experience than writing, The Bird and the Blade for 6 years just for the love of writing. That is very different than, so we've already paid for this. Could you please write this book immediately? That is a very different feeling. And I thought that sophomore slump was not going to happen to me because I already knew it was going to happen in Soul Swift. I knew kind of the emotional core of that book. I'm like, that is not going to happen to me. It totally happened to me. Like, everything that could have gone wrong with that book went wrong with that book. I mean, I spent hundreds of thousands of words figuring out how not to write that book. I just can't even tell you. At one point, first of all, the original version of Soul Swift was in third person past tense. Now, if you've read Soul Swift, you know that book is told in the first person present from Gellia's point of view. But the original version was third person past tense, and it followed Gellia and Tavik closely in alternating chapters. So at one point, you're following kind of Gellia, what Gellia's kind of doing and thinking. And in the next chapter, you're really following more what Tavik is doing and thinking. And then eventually, due to publisher feedback, and I agreed with this, we decided it needed to be first person present. So I turned the whole book first person present. And now you have Gellia and Tavik taking turns telling the story personally to you back and forth. And the book ballooned into like 150,000 words, which is really, really, really big. And I will never forget the point in time where I'm having an editorial call with my editor. Oh my God, I love her so much. And she began the conversation with, so I've got a kind of wacky idea. I think we should cut Tavik's point of view. And that was like 65,000 words to cut a whole point of view out of the book. 65. Most young adult novels are 65,000 words. Like, that's what a normal book is in the young adult world. And it's like, if you could cut that, and it will just make the whole book from Gellia's point of view. That was rough. That book was just brutal to write. But you know what? She was right. 3 seconds after she said it, I'm like, she's right. I'll do it. But it just was like one more hurdle. There was just nothing went right. It was very difficult to write that book. And yet I did it, and I'm very, very proud of it. The one thing that was easier or better was that I learned so much through the editorial process of The Bird and the Blade. And I'm one of those wacky people that loves revision. I love getting my editorial notes, and I'm really glad that I get along so well with my editor because she's brilliant and wonderful. But I love getting those notes. I love making the book better. And so by the time I'm like on draft 3 of Soul Swift, I've been working with my editor long enough to like already imagine exactly what she's going to write in the margins. Like, how does she feel here? How does he look here? So I can like anticipate those pitfalls that I have before I make those mistakes.
Wow. Yeah. That is great. Oh man. Oh, I love that. But oh my heavens. I'm sorry. That was so great. And yes, because all that work though, I will tell you, Megan, it came out to be like such a perfect, wonderful book. Like, I mean, all the work was not for nothing.
I will say, like, I'm hearing beating myself up. I am proud of that book, but just please know that I bled it onto the page.
Yes.
But I'm proud of it because it did. I put a lot of work into it.
Yes, and it shows, and it's wonderful. You should be proud of this. Like, I mean, so proud of it. It was wonderful. Oh my goodness. All right, so we are getting a little closer to the end, guys. So if there are any questions that anybody wanted to ask Megan, please put them into the live chat now. I do have a couple other things, but we are getting towards the wrap up. So one of the things that I want to wrap up with, so is there anything new that you're working on that you would like to share with us? Do you have another book in mind?
So here's the thing. So, like, are there other books that I'm working on? Yes. Would I like to tell you about them? Yes. Can I tell you about them? So, because, like, I think a lot of people don't realize it, for the audience at home, in the publishing industry, if something you're working on has not been announced officially in Publishers Weekly or Publishers Marketplace, you really can't say much about them. So what I can tell you is, yes, I'm working on things. And I can't say much about them. I will say, because I was talking about how hard Soul Swift was to write. And what's been really interesting about 2020 is I think 2020 was such a miserable slog of a year. And apparently it's still going. I mean, it's like 2021 is just like 2020 part 2. I don't know. But I think, like, things have just been so depressingly awful in the world that escaping into writing has been like kind of one of the great joys of 2020. Not that there were many great joys of 2020, but for me, that was really helpful to have a project to slip into. And I think when and if that book ever sees the light of day, I think it will be very clear that I took joy in writing it. Yes, it was the thing that really kind of got me through 2020. And it was nice to enjoy writing a book again, as opposed to the absolute slog that was Soul Swift. So that's what I can tell you.
I am thinking that is good telling, because Ben, that sounds like another book at least is on the horizon from Megan Bannen, possibly. Which I am excited about now. And we actually got a question from Allison Berry. She is wondering, she said, how much do you outline for your books?
Not much, not very much. I'm pretty organic in the writing process. I usually, before I start out, have what I call the spine of the story. So, like, I know the key scenes that absolutely have to happen in that story. And there's usually like a couple at the beginning, 1 or 2 in the middle, and I definitely know the end. And the process of writing the first few drafts is really figuring out how those points are connected. So, like with Soul Swift, I wrote several drafts that were examples of how those points are not supposed to be connected. And we have to chuck it and then figure out, okay, wait, let's try again. How do we connect these points? With the book I'm working on right now, it's been so much nicer to me than Soul Swift. Like, it just really came easily, where I knew the basic plot of the story, just the key scenes, but everything just led so neatly one into the other. Just, that book is so much nicer. But I always kind of start with this idea where I know, like, the really important stuff, but the rest of it is kind of discovery. I think when I first tried to write The Bird and the Blade, I really did try to outline, because one of the things that was hard about that book is it's not linear. It's told out of chronological order, so it jumps back and forth in time. And trying to figure out, like, the order of the story when it's not chronological was a bear. And so I did start off with like an outline, but what I found out with that book was anytime something came up where I'm like, this other scene needs to be in there. Anytime something that wasn't in the outline came up and I wrote that scene, that scene was always better than the scenes from the outline. So I don't know.
So
I'm sloppy. I'm a sloppy mess is what I am.
Really, whatever you're doing, keep it, because
it's from point A to point B.
Because it absolutely works. Allison also commented that she cannot wait for a third book from you. So now you have so many people just awaiting your grand entrance into the publishing realm.
Well, and I will tell you, I don't know what is going to be next for me in publishing. I don't know exactly what you're going to see next, but what I can tell you is it's going to be markedly different from what has come before.
Yeah.
I think you'll still it has a Megan Bannen flavor to it, but it's going to be quite different from those first two books.
We do love the Megan Bannen flavor. Yes. Right. And it looks like we have another question from Daniel Dower. So he says, I know you don't want to compare yourself to Shakespeare or one of the Greek tragic writers. That being said, who would you say is your closest authorial doppelganger?
Oh, that's really hard. And I come at this too as a librarian because I have some very strong opinions about reader's advisory when someone's like, I love this book, what would you recommend? Because I think a lot of folks tend to go for like, oh, you love fantasy like Harry Potter, here's another fantasy kind of book. And I think sometimes what I'm really interested is, here's a book that made me feel this particular way. What's another book that's going to make me feel this way? And sometimes those books can be very surprising. Like to me, if someone really liked Hunger Games, the book I was most likely to give them was Graceling. And those are two really different books, but to me, they felt very similar. And so, so this is going to come out of left field, and it's also another author who's way out of my league and is much better than I am. But I would actually have to say Marcus Zuzak. And the reason I say that is, so like back in the day when I would go out and book talks and things like that to different schools, and I'd bring a whole bunch of books with me and I'd talk about all these books, I always brought one of his, and especially one of his Cameron Wolfe books, like his first trilogy, would bring those with me. And one of the reasons I would say, this is one of the only books I've ever read that actually reminds me as a teenager. Like I've read so many young adult books and I love them, but there's only been two characters I've ever read that reminded me of me as a teenager. And one of them was Cameron Wolfe in his first three books. And which is crazy because like this is like an Australian dude. And like the first thing I do in one of those books is like discuss knocking off a dentist's office. Like I'm never going to like rob a dentist. I never would have done that as a teenager. The second book is all about boxing. I hate boxing. And so it's just very interesting because I've often wondered why do I love these books so much? Why do I see myself as a teenager in that guy? And then I actually got to go see him speak. This was last year or the year before, whenever Bridge of Clay came out. And he's talking, he's a really engaging speaker, and he's really funny. And like, I'm sitting there the whole time going, this guy's great. I just love this guy. He's fantastic. What a great guy. And then after a while, as I'm listening to him speak, I realize he's like talking about his kids, and he's talking about his wife, and he's talking about his parents and his siblings. And like the way he talks about them and the relationship he has with them, I mean, I feel like I can be related to this guy. This is the way it feels to me. Yes, I get what you're saying. And so I think as far as this kind of like how do books feel, I feel like his characters feel very similar to my characters, even though on the outside those books have nothing in common. Also, he's a much, 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 much better writer than I am, and I'm okay with that.
Well, I think you are a very, very, very good writer, and you could definitely be in his league. So, but that is a very interesting thought, because yeah, you're right. If someone says, "Oh, I really like fantasy," our automatic thing, a lot of us at the bookstore, you give them some other fantasy that is like that fantasy. But I like your idea of like, well, this book made me feel this way. What's another book that makes me feel the same way? Because that's also another great way to get people to read things they didn't think they would not think that they would like. Like, but if what you liked about the book was how it made you feel, maybe, we should be looking more at, is this book, does that have the same feeling that you get? Because I think that's a really great answer, Megan. I really like that.
Librarian power.
Yes. Librarians do have powers. Okay. I love librarians.
Always. I love booksellers. There we
go. They're the best. Yay. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, and Daniel actually says, ooh, thank you. I now have someone to go and book binge.
You have his books are so good. They're so good. My favorite is I Am the Messenger. That's my favorite by him.
So that's awesome. I am going, before I go on a little bit of a selling spree for your books, which are wonderful, I did want to ask you one final question from me anyway, is I would like to know, what is one of the most recent books you've read and enjoyed?
Ooh. Well, I just finished the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner, because the last book in that series just came out, Return of the Thief. I am evangelical about that book series. I love those books so much. The flames on the side of my face. I love those books with all of my heart, every single one. They're just so smart and clever, fantastic plot twists, characters with so much complexity. Also, she's a really good author or is one of those authors who's really good about incorporating a little bit of a sense of humor here and there into the hefty stuff that we cover. It's just, they're so clever. And I have read that Disney is going to be adapting the first book in that series for Disney Plus. And all I can say is, Disney, do not mess this up. I'm watching you. Yeah, that last, sometimes it's always disappointing when the last book in a series is doesn't quite go where you need it to go. And man, no, she ended on a high note. It was very well done. So there's my book I've read recently that I loved.
Yay! Oh, that is so great. All right. So now I am going to do a little self-plugging with the bookstore and your lovely books. So Megan's first book, The Bird and the Blade, is not currently on our shelves, but we can definitely order it. It is coming. So, don't forget, we can order it. It is totally available for that if you want it sooner than when we get it in the store. And Soul Swift, her newest one, lovely and wonderful, is currently on my staff pick shelf, unless somehow it's sold out today, but I don't think it's sold out today, but you never know. But it is currently on our shelves now, and it is wonderful. As you can see, I'm petting the spine because, we have to do that. And also, somehow, I have misplaced my wonderful special goodies that Megan has sent us. So if you buy her book, you will get a beautiful signed book plate, which I am very sad that I could not find mine now.
Oh, I think I've got some handy.
So
keep talking.
And we also have Soul Swift bookmarks, as well as Bird the Blade bookmarks. So yes, that is the beautiful, wonderful thing, and I absolutely love it. I love the quote on there, and if you read the book, you will totally understand the quote. And there are lovely bookmarks for Soul Swift.
Did I send you Bird and Blade? I've got Bird and Blade.
Yes, we do have those as well. So please come in, get bookmarks, get signed book plates from Megan, read her books. They are just absolutely fantastic, and you are just so wonderful, Megan.
You're wonderful.
So amazing. You have been so great. All right. So, but guys, you really do. You need to read her books and just come in, and it's just so great. And I am going to open it. If there's any last minute things anybody listening wants to ask Megan, please type them into the live chat now while I figure out what's going on here. Sorry. guys. Something is coming in. Is it something else is coming? No. Oh wait, sorry. Hold on. I'm sorry, everyone. Okay. Oh, Allison again. Thank you, Allison. You have been just very talkative and we love you. Thank you so much. It says, thank you so much, both of you. I enjoyed this a lot. I'll be reading your books this year for sure. So,
thank you, Allison. I appreciate that.
And I'm very excited. Oh, thank you so much, Allison. That's so nice because I got to tell you guys, it is a little nerve-wracking doing this.
I wish I could give a round of applause for Marielle because you did a lovely job. It's been fun to talk to you.
Yes, we should give a round of applause for Megan as well. And thank you all for everybody who is watching and who watched and who commented. And I hope to see you guys in the store or just in general. If you want to order her books, you can do that as well. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much, Megan, for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yes. Okay. Well, bye, everybody. Have a nice night.
Bye.